Hi everyone, this is Ariel Paiement here. I want to take a second to just thank Alan first for inviting me to go ahead and do a video interview for his blog. I had reached out asking if anybody was willing to help me with a blog tour for On Twilights Wings, which just recently released, and Alan said he was willing to help out. So he's given me just a list of questions to answer. So hopefully this will be something that's interesting for you guys and will help you to understand a little bit more about me and the book, as well as where the series is heading and the plans that I have for now.
Tell us about you. Who is Ariel Paiement?
So I am currently a recent college grad. I graduated in May of this last year. And I graduated in accounting, of all things, I know. It's not really for me, but I did finish out the degree, and so I'm kind of in between things right now. But writing has been something that has stuck with me, not just while I was in college, but before that, although certainly it was something that I continued to do throughout college, even as I was pursuing my degree in accounting. As far as childhood goes, I guess, I've always had this passion for writing, mainly because of my family and my parents. My mom's not a big reader, but she wanted us to be, so she really instilled in us a love for that early on. Since I was homeschooled all the way through until college, I had a lot of different opportunities to just explore, to read, whatever really I wanted within reason. And my dad was a really big reader, so together the two of them really poured into me a love for books and reading in general, which ended up turning into a love for writing as well. And that is something that they encouraged me in as I went through high school. Especially, I went through several different writing courses. They encouraged me to get books on the topic, and to just attend different events that had to do with it. And they really encouraged me to push forward, and that if it was something I really wanted to do, that I should really be trying to improve. So I would say overall, they weren't necessarily supportive of me turning it into a career, or of me thinking that I was going to be able to pay the bills off of writing, which is fair because a lot of indie authors and even traditionally published ones can't. But they were very supportive of me writing in general. So I guess that's a little bit about me and how I got into writing, and background, I guess, on things that encouraged me to continue going.
What led you to become a Christian?
I grew up in a home that was very supportive of me in a lot of ways. Christianity is one of those. I did grow up in a Christian home, so I grew up in church. I grew up hearing a lot about the gospel, about Jesus, about God. And both of my parents are born-again believers. For me, I did make a profession of faith really early on, but I wouldn't say that I necessarily truly started living out that profession until I was quite a bit older, when I was roughly 17. So right before I went off to college. And I wouldn't say so much that I got saved at that point, as much as I would say that it was a rededication of my life and understanding for the first time what it really meant to be a Christian, what it really meant to be saved. And that was kind of the first step for me in the direction of making it my faith, not just my parents' faith. So that was a time full of a lot of discovery, a lot of questions about my faith, about writing, about how it all related, and just a lot of other things too that I had to grow in as a Christian. I did go to a Christian college, so that kind of fed into and helped me to grow as well, because I was surrounded there by friends who were also fellow Christians who could encourage me to grow and to continue learning more in my walk.
What does it mean to you to be a Christian author?
I guess the easiest way I could explain this is that to me, I am a Christian first and an author second. My work is not necessarily always allegorical or even directly faith-based. An unbeliever could read it and they're not necessarily going to come away with a clear presentation of the gospel message. But what they will walk away with is some truth that is rooted in Christianity, whether that is like it was with Bane of Ashgreth, where it's exploring the idea that truth is worth the cost, that having truth is worth the price, and that there is an ultimate truth, even if the world wants to reject that, and even if the world wants to say there's no ultimate truth, it's all subjective, and whatever goes for you is fine. So that was kind of the theme that Bane of Ashgreth explored. With On Twilight's Wings, I think the main theme that I explored there was probably the theme of love, and also the theme of understanding that power corrupts, and that a desire for revenge corrupts. It isn't necessarily as obvious a theme as maybe the one in Bane of Ashgreth was, but it's definitely there as you see that thirst for revenge ruining and destroying somebody who originally started out as not being that bad of a person. And likewise, you also see the protagonists struggling against that desire to take revenge on someone for the wrongs that have been served to them, and that struggle that really all of us have to deal with that hurt that's inflicted when someone else strikes out at us. And do we then turn around and try to get revenge, try to strike back? Or do we choose to do what's right anyway and to live our lives? So I guess to me, like, being a Christian author doesn't necessarily mean that I always am going to talk about salvation or directly even talk about God in the books. To me, being a Christian author means that every book that I write should have a worldview that is obviously Christian. There should be a clear line between right and wrong. Obviously, there are some areas that are definitely gray areas, and I would say that there are some things that maybe I feel comfortable with showing or not showing that other Christian authors wouldn't. But to me, when there is a clear scriptural basis to say that something is wrong, I believe that it should be portrayed as wrong. It shouldn't be given any kind of quarter for the reader to wonder, well, maybe this isn't really a problem. No, if it's a problem, if it's wrong, it needs to be obvious that it is. Likewise, if something is right and something is good, it should be upheld as something that is right and good. Going along with that, the other thing that I see as a responsibility as a Christian author is that all of my books should clearly display the fact that not only is there obvious right and wrong and moral good and evil, but there is also a very real aspect of consequence for your actions. Now, obviously we know that there are consequences to doing the wrong thing, but there are also consequences for doing the right thing, particularly if the world does not agree with what that right thing was. If there's something that you have to do that is right, a character has to do that is right, but the world, the government does not accept it and they view it as something that is wrong and punishable, well, you can't escape that there is a consequence for choosing to do something that they made illegal. So I guess to me, I would sum it up as being a Christian author to me means giving a clear representation of right and wrong in my books, and always making sure that there are consequences for every single action that is taken, particularly for the ones that are wrong or were not good decisions. So I guess that's what I would say it means to me.
What do you prefer about self-publishing as opposed to the traditional publishing route?
I have done a little bit of publishing that is similar to traditional publishing. I have not gone with any traditional publishing houses myself, but I have worked with an indie publishing press. So some of the things I guess that I noticed that I liked and disliked about this. With the traditional publishing side of things, I definitely had less control over what happened. Now, because it was an indie press and not technically traditional publishing, I did have a little bit more control over stuff. Like, I worked very closely with my editor from the editorial team for both short stories that I had in the anthologies I participated in. And we talked through things. We didn't just make changes without making sure that they were acceptable. And I felt like the team really worked well with me. But I do know that some of the common complaints for traditional publishing are that the author doesn't always have a lot of control. Sometimes things can get to print or get changed about a book in traditional publishing that the author would not have wanted changed about the book. Sometimes too there may be issues with like cover design and other things that just you're not in control of that. Similarly, when you go with more of a traditional route, you're not necessarily in control all the time, at least, of your review readers and ARC copies and marketing, because they do a lot of that for you. There are certainly things I know, especially for smaller publishing presses, that you are involved in and you do need to do. And I definitely was involved in some of that marketing side of things when I worked with the indie publishing press that I worked with. But it wasn't super heavy involvement on that side of things, which is fine. Like, I didn't mind that necessarily, but I definitely had a lot less control over the process. And I guess that when it comes down to it, that's what I like about the independent publishing on my own, is that I know what's going on with the book. Like, if it turns out with a quality that I can't support, it's not because someone else messed up, it's because I messed up. So then I have to fix it. And to some extent it is a lot easier for me to fix it, just because, like, you know, I have control over the entire process. So if something is wrong with a book, I can go back and make changes and adjust things as necessary. Now, it might be a little bit of work depending on what format I'm trying to change and what I'm doing, but I am able to make those changes. Whereas with a traditional publishing house, it is what it is. If you don't like it once it comes out, well, that's too bad, because you're stuck. That's just the way it is. It is a lot more work to do the traditional publishing, though. I will say that. I know that a lot of people do hire editors and cover designers, and a lot of, they'll get ARC readers, beta readers before they ever put the book out. For me, again, because it's not traditional publishing, you do have more freedom in how you choose to go about the process. But for me, the process generally is more that I will put it out onto one of my writing platforms first, see what the readers are saying about it, get input from other authors that I can trust, and kind of assess from there where things should go. A lot of times I will submit things to the critique group that I'm part of as well to get feedback and then edit based off of that. But I do all of my own editing, so it does consume a lot of time to put this out. But it does save me a little bit of money in the process, which is something that I wouldn't necessarily be able to do if I was looking to traditionally publish. I also get to keep all of my royalties I'm not getting paid a lump sum, certainly, for the book and then never seeing another cent for it. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with how traditional publishing does their royalties or their lump sum payments for the books per se. I guess I just like that the non-traditional route with the indie publishing is something that I know what I'm gonna get. It lives or dies based off of my ability to market it, yes, but in exchange for that, I have a lot more control over what happens and even how much I make, because it's not going to be a situation where the publisher, lets it die in obscurity and I don't ever see another cent off of the book. It's not going to be like that. That would only happen if I stop trying to push that book or I'm not doing a good job of marketing.
What can you tell us about On Twilight's Wings?
On Twilight's Wings is probably one of the more unique pieces that I've done recently. The reason for this is that while the first book doesn't obviously gear towards this direction in and of itself, On Twilight's Wings and the following books are the most obviously Christian fantasy that I've done, with the exception of On the Narrow Way, a short story that I had published with Fort and Key for one of the anthologies I was in. It is going to be the most obviously Christian book I have. The reason I say that is that when you start getting into the second and third books, the characters run into or encounter this being known as Highest. Now, I mentioned this with Bane of Ashgrith when I discussed the deities system that I use for books. So for On Twilight's Wings, there is some mention here and there of deities, not as strongly as there is in Bane of Ashgrith or the books set on Alcardia, but there is some mention of deities there, here and there. Highest is different than that. Like I had mentioned in the article I wrote on how I do the different systems of deities, when I'm dealing with a piece that interacts with Earth or is set on Earth, like On Twilight's Wings does, I may have a system of deities, but only one of them will be portrayed as truly God, and that is only ever going to be the Christian God of the Bible. So for Highest, that is exactly what he represents. He represents Christ and the God of the Bible, and the characters don't encounter him in the first book because the first book is a lot of setup work that had to happen in order to really launch into the rest of the story. And well, I think that On Twilight's Wings is definitely can be a fun read for a young adult audience. It doesn't change the fact that it is definitely setup work in a lot of areas. Without On Twilight's Wings, the other books wouldn't make any sense. They wouldn't be possible. The political climate that exists would just be confusing to the reader. So On Twilight's Wings is an indispensable start to the series, but because of that, you don't see as much of them encountering or hearing about Highest. And one of the biggest reasons for that, I would say, is that with On Twilight's Wings, the planet that they live on, the universe they live on, is very ignorant of the God of the Bible. They used to worship him, and it's something where it just kind of faded out and died. So they don't really know anything about him, and it isn't until the second book that they actually run into people who can share about Highest, about the God of the Bible, and allow them to encounter him themselves. So I would say that's something that definitely makes this series as a whole unique, is the fact that I explore that encounter with God, that encounter with Christ, and the journey that the characters take in regards to that a lot more clearly than I do in other series. This was intentional. I meant to do that. It's, I know, a little bit different from what I have for other series, but I think different in a good way. One of the reasons that I did this is because I feel like there is a lot of young adult fantasy out there, but there isn't a lot of young adult fantasy that is Christian in nature. And when I say Christian in nature, I don't just mean Christian in influence or in the background of the author. I mean good Christian fantasy that includes God in the story in one way or another, and that gives teens and young adults a clear view of scriptural principles along with it. There isn't a lot of that out there, and what there is out there, it can be really difficult for Christian parents because the authors don't always do a good job of telling an interesting story alongside the Christian portion of it. A lot of times the books can feel really preachy as opposed to telling a good story that helps the teens and young adults to understand Christianity and encounter Christ in that story. And I remember that being something that really frustrated me when I was reading, because I did enjoy allegorical fantasy and Christian fantasy, but I didn't find a lot of it that really appealed for that reason, because they ruined the story itself by essentially shoving all of the doctrinal sides down your throat. And if you wanted to read a doctrinal textbook or their thesis on their doctrinal beliefs, then it would be fine, but that's not why you're there. So my goal with this series is to address that problem, to give reading material that can entertain those who really enjoy fantasy while also still providing the Christian influence and the encounter with the person of Christ that a lot of times parents and Christian young people are looking for but not finding. So I guess if there was one thing I would say about On Twilights Wings, it would be that while this first book doesn't necessarily go into that deeply or focus on it, the rest of the series will.
What are your writing plans going forward from here?
I guess I kind of answered a little bit of what my writing plans are regarding this particular series. I do have the second book written. I'm just working on the editing. It may take a little while because I do have some other projects which I'll talk about here in a minute. But with this particular series, the hope is that I will have the second book out around this same time next year. So I know it's a little bit of a wait, but in order to keep up with the schedule that I set for everything else, that's just kind of how it has to be. In terms of other projects right now, I am currently focusing on building up the books that take place on Alcardia. That's the world that I've done the most amount of building with. It's the one that so much different stuff connects to. It's not that, like, I guess the world from On Twilights Wings, especially in the latter section of the books, does connect to a lot of other things as well, but really Alcardia is kind of my pet project, I guess I would say. I've spent a ton of time world building for it. I have a lot of different books planned there. I have all the books that will come after Bane of Ashkareth that help to tell the history and the stories of different famous characters in this world's past. But I also have another series that I just finished the first book to, that tells the story of the Son of Shadows that is mentioned in Bane of Ashkareth. So I do have quite a few different things that I'm working on. but most of them do relate around that world, and so that's going to be the main focus of what I'm working on for writing, besides working on getting the rest of the series for On Twilights Wings up. So I hope that you guys have enjoyed this, that this has been informative, and that it has helped you guys out in understanding a little bit about me, as well as about the newest release that I have out. If you guys have any questions, you can definitely feel free to reach out to me through email or through my blog at the Fantasy Nook blog, and I think Alan will probably be providing the links for those things. So yeah, thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you again to Alan for allowing me to feature for this interview, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.